Okay.
3?
Yeah.
Are we
Three.
are we going to delay the pressing business?
Yeah.
Okay.
Crackdown's pressing business to me. I
Yeah,
wanna hear,
like Crackdown is a game that got delayed for years and years, and that game got announced. Was it
2014?
2014?
Yeah. E3, I think.
And is just now coming out. At the time, there's a really funny news story on a GameSpot with like quotes from Ken Lobb talking about like, oh yeah, we're not calling it Crackdown 3 because it's more of a sequel to Crackdown 1. So whatever. Either way, we're just calling it Crackdown.
This is from like years ago.
Yeah,
right?
this is from a very long time ago. And here, the last week they released Crackdown 3. So here's the thing. I like Crackdown. I liked Crackdown. When it came out at a very opportune time.
Yeah.
It did things that other open world games maybe weren't doing a ton of at the time.
Focusing on the fun.
Yeah, focusing on the fun
Making you
and
feel powerful.
big powerful stuff. Like it didn't necessarily have a ton of variety, but it had enough. Crackdown 2, I think, sacrificed a lot of that variety to come out faster, and they put the zombie stuff in it that I think didn't really do them any favors. But it wasn't necessarily a bad game. It was just kind of disappointing because it didn't really build on Crackdown 1 effectively. Crackdown 3 feels more like they just kind of made Crackdown 2 again. It doesn't have zombies, but like it's a short kind of very repetitive game that I feel like it's incapable of making someone feel like they maybe felt the first time they played the original Crackdown.
Yeah.
Okay.
The open world games have come a very long way since then. This feels like it doesn't even really feel like a throwback to Crackdown 1. It feels like, hey, this kind of does some of the same stuff that Crackdown is known for, but not as well, to the point where I feel like I would have a better time going back and playing Crackdown 1 again, which runs in 4K on an Xbox One X and all that other stuff. Like they've done that. Like Crackdown 3 is short and just it's painfully repetitive in terms of just like the mission variety. It's just here they took these monorail stations, like the different types of missions, and just kind of stamped them around the landscape, and they're more or less identical.
And those are like the main story missions, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are the missions you do to get to the boss fights, which most of the boss fights they're overly straightforward, and unsatisfying in a way. One of the chemical boss fights, you don't even necessarily directly face off against the enemy itself. It's more like, go around and open these valves, which is kind of the thing you've been doing in the missions to get to that boss fight. And then he just dies from some explosion. And you're like, all right. There's one like mech fight that I thought was like, okay. It was also like the first or second one I did. The final confrontation is really underwhelming. And it's a 6-hour game.
That seems about right. Like if for a game of that type, that doesn't have a shit ton of variety.
Sure, yeah.
But
It's on one hand, I wouldn't want this game to be longer because the mission types, are very repetitive. There are not very many of them, and they're basically like two types per. There's like industrial and there's enforcement. There's basically like two types per. So there's two industrial missions based around chemical stuff. There's two based around the enforcement side of things and so on. So yeah, I wouldn't want this game to be any longer, but what I do want is this game to be better, and more in line with kind of, like I said, open world, Saints Row happened.
Yeah.
Yep.
Games with powers happened. Open world games fell into and out of favor multiple times since Crackdown 2 came out. Yeah. Which was 9 years ago.
Yeah.
And this game doesn't feel like it's learned anything from any of those games, but it doesn't feel like sharp enough to be like a fun throwback either.
Gotcha.
And so it kind of just they screw it up at both ends.
It sounds like it was less of, hey, we've got a great idea for Crackdown 3, and more of, hey, we should make hey, we're being told to make a Crackdown 3. What do we do with it?
Yeah, and I'm sure there's like some really interesting story behind the development of the game.
Looking at the Wikipedia page, it seems like there were more developers involved with this game than ended up being the case at the end.
Yeah, if you remember, like this was the game that they were promoting as like, hey, all the physics and destruction are going to take place in the cloud.
Right.
And that was like their big hook out of the gate.
Big black hole gun, right? And that would like mess up the physics, and they showed that off, kind of like, whoa, physics.
Yeah, there's a singularity grenade that kind of does that, but only the people.
Like they had like
cloud physics.
David Jones' name was attached to this,
right?
like kind of
APB's David Jones.
Yes. Or the original Grand Theft
Yes,
Auto,
okay,
as
yes.
they would tell you.
Yeah.
But like his studio was attached to this, and like one other one, and then his studio got acquired by Epic at some point, and it seems like they stopped working on this game.
Yeah, but maybe the part was done, or maybe the part got scrapped, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There may have been more planned for this that just didn't come together.
So
but
at some
who
point
knows?
they clarified, which if that's a clarification or a hard change, we don't know. But at some point they said, "Oh, that destructible stuff is only in the multiplayer."
Which has much smaller maps than
which is
than
a
the big
totally
city.
separate executable that you launch from the Xbox Dash called Wrecking Zone, and it's 5v5 team. Like one mode is like a kill confirmed, like get the badges after you kill them to get the points. The other one is like a territory control mode. And these are set on much smaller maps that, the stuff does blow apart. Like if you punch through a wall and all that other stuff, like you can do it.
Is that cool?
No, well, not really.
Okay.
I mean, it
seems fine.
Like I'm sure on some technical level, it's difficult to keep all that rubble in sync across 10 clients.
Yeah.
But in terms of like actually making like a compelling team multiplayer mode, like it's not that big of a deal. Like the rubble just kind of gets in your way more than anything else. And so
I would prefer that stuff to be in like a single, not a single player, but like a co-op kind of scenario.
Exactly.
Where we're
Yes.
just sort of going through wrecking stuff.
like you want you want Red Faction Guerrilla.
I'm sitting here like open world games of the last 12 years are just cycling through my mind right now. Like every aspect of this game has some analog somewhere, and it reminds me of like those old Incredible Hulk open world games,
Sure.
Ultimate Destruction.
Ultimate Destruction,
like
yeah.
those games let you tear down the city as you ran around.
But it also, Crackdown is not a shooter, so it has lock-on targeting in the single player. You're locking onto enemies and shooting them. You're tapping the trigger to keep
and throwing cars.
or throwing cars. Whatever you're doing, homing rockets, all that sort of stuff. But you're locking onto your targets, and so all of that stuff carries into the multiplayer. So shooting is not the skill thing, because you just lock onto an enemy and hold down the trigger. And then it becomes like, okay, well, when you lock onto someone, they see what direction you were coming from. So they know like, oh, maybe I can get behind a building. And then it's on you to be like, okay, I'm either going to pivot around the building or punch through it or just let off the lock and go shoot somebody else, which is actually the smarter thing. So it just becomes two enemies lock onto each other, both start shooting each other. Then someone else from the team, one team shows up, finishes the fight, and you move on. And it's just this. It's not fun.
Doesn't sound like
it's
it.
not. It's
It's not what I was expecting out of the multiplayer. Wow.
the destruction doesn't actually really add much to it, and like I said, it kind of just gets in the way because when a building does come apart, and it comes apart with physics. It comes apart like all the fucking chunks turn into chunks, and you're like, oh, and then they despawn. Because if they stayed in the world,
That'd be too much
you would
to
be
keep track of,
wading neck deep through this rubble and not being able to shoot and do other things, which, maybe that would be interesting, but it would not be the same game. So it just doesn't amount to much. Like the idea of this like cloud physics destructibility thing that was like the first thing out of the gate they were talking about. It was the bullet point everyone remembered. So at some point you're like, oh, well, I guess they had to try to make good on that, but it doesn't add anything to the game.
It sounds like it makes the maps more barren and boring, to a degree, because you're just getting rid of the things that are in these already plain maps.
And it's a game that like I think there's a nugget there of like, man, if they had been able to add more variety to the single player and really flesh that out, like that would be a really fun co-op game. As it is, it's not a terrible, like if you were just ignored the story or lack thereof and just jumped in with a friend that you talk to regularly all the time and just blasted through it and didn't pay for it because you were a Game Pass subscriber.
Yeah, I was going to say, is this a Game Pass?
It is.
Yes.
Then I could see it. But like on its own merits, like there's just not a lot there. It's like, it's kind of shocking how little there is to Crackdown 3. I guess I would say.
Yeah.
And
I mean, that could go both ways. Brad brought it up, these types of games have progressed, and it's very easy to draw the comparisons, but I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's what they're going for. I think they are going for like a retro kind of throwback, but you're saying that they're not even nailing that part of it.
Not at all. Like that's
what's the most
if they were
me.
trying to make like a throwback to the original Crackdown, I think the orbs would be laid out better. I think that they would have done more to that. Also, like making Crackdown 1 again, I don't think there's a lot of
it's not enough in 2019.
No, not at all. And
like you said,
that was such a killer loop though. Like that game was
it was at the time,
and to distill it down,
right?
If done right, I think there's room for that.
But I think that's. That game again, Crackdown 1 is available and was recently and maybe still is available for free.
That game was just so much more meaningful in 2007 than it is now. Like all these other open world games have done superpowers, like we talked about, like the Nemesis, because they've got a hierarchy of crime bosses.
It's not enough to just say like, hey, we check all the bullet points for Crackdown 1.
Yeah.
They need to make a game that makes you feel the way you felt when you played Crackdown 1.
Yeah,
and
because that game did things you hadn't seen before, and this does not. But again, like in a world where like the Nemesis system exists, they could have done more with their hierarchy of bosses or whatever. Like there are so many directions they could have gone with this thing.
And I was totally expecting all of that. And wow.
I think as the game got more and more delayed, I think my expectations got more and more in check. But I think even in terms of like, hey, I'm maybe not expecting a ton from this. Like it didn't hit that bar either. When I realized like, oh gosh, I'm done with this game. This is maybe an afternoon's worth of content here. What the hell? Like the idea that this game took that long to come out and here it is. And I did damn near everything in that 6-ish, 7-ish hours. It wasn't like I left a bunch of stuff like actual missions. Like I didn't do a lot of rooftop races. I didn't do a lot of the car races. But like in terms of like actual story relevant missions, I did everything, and that's not enough. If that's a $20 game, and that's I think the weird place we're at, where like Microsoft, and I think we said some similar stuff with Sea of Thieves, and I think Tetris is maybe in some of this conversation as well. But like the idea of like, hey, if you are already, so I wouldn't recommend someone signs up for Game Pass to play this. But if someone was already a Game Pass subscriber
and happy with what they're getting,
then it's that thing of like, well, here's another thing for you to play. You might as well play it. It's not it's not bad. It's just short and boring, and like there's better ways to spend your time. But hey, you and a friend co-op, like whatever. You could do a lot worse, I guess. And so that's a weird one because it's like, I don't know that I would recommend it, especially for the amount of money they're trying to charge for it if you want to buy a copy.
I think you said it. Time, you have to consider time as an expense just as much as money. For now, like with the way that services and stuff work like that now, you got to value your time.
Yeah, and it's a bummer. It's disappointing.
I still want to play it because, like you said, why not? If you already have Game Pass, just get
exactly.
it.
Like,
I downloaded it. I haven't started it up yet.
That's not a great place for Microsoft to be, but it's better than like, hey, you might as well play it.
Yeah,
I guess.
I've gone from I will never play this game to I might play this game because I can play it for free.
Like it's all relative to what else they're putting out on that service, and if people feel like overall they're getting their money's worth,
definitely.
Because like Netflix puts out originals every week that I couldn't care less about, but as long as they're putting out enough stuff that I do want to see, like that $10 a month is totally fine. Right?
Yeah.
So if that's where Microsoft is getting to, like that's probably perfectly adequate.
I don't want this to be a value add though. That's so disappointing.
I mean, Crackdown, like totally. Like I want a Crackdown sequel to be a big deal.
Yeah, totally.
And maybe that's like asking a bit much, but Crackdown 1 was surprising. Yeah. People bought it because they thought it was the Halo beta.
Yeah.
And then it turned out like, hey, wait a minute,
3.
Crackdown is actually really good.
Yeah.
And then they haven't matched that since.
Do you think they need to just completely change it up? Like stop chasing that?
This is it. Yeah, they will not make another Crackdown game.
They can't.
This is it.
Now, if they made a sequel to Project Sunburst, the Windows Phone game that was like geolocation stuff before this Pokemon Go shit.
What?
Yeah.
All right, you went there. You didn't have to, but you did.
That I might be into playing.
Yeah.
That's not true.
How's he used to Terry Crews in that? Is he quipping all the time?
He's in the introductory cutscene where he's like the leader of all these agents that then get blown out of the sky.
Oh, he's so amped up too.
Yeah, and he's like over the top.
Good lord.
Yeah. And that's like, like tonally you're like, okay, if this is the tone for this game, like let's go. All right, let's make it fucking over the top crazy. You know, it's not going to be Saints Row, but hey, what are you going to do? And then when you can pick him as a playable character.
Sure.
Jackson is his name.
With an X.
With an X.
Oh.
And The agents do quip in game, but for some reason it's mixed really low.
Damn it.
So like you occasionally hear like, oh, is that Terry Crews saying something in the background that's somehow quieter than a pedestrian? Like I thought like, oh, is this like, is my center channel too low? Like,
Right.
I played it on PC, which is, more conventional speakers than my home theater. Like I played it on headphones, like multiple places. And it just seems like the agent quips are mixed super low.
They're all just really self-conscious about their jokes.
Yeah. They're not too into the material. And so it just becomes like that kind of Crackdown voice of the agency guy.
Okay.
And then a rebel leader that's in the city. And it's
God, like that's another,
and this guy just talking.
That's another,
no, they ignore all of that stuff.
That's another aspect. I mean, we talked about it in the quick look, but there's another aspect of this thing where they could have taken that in a cool direction.
So like the end of Crackdown 1,
Right.
the agency is revealed to be evil as fuck.
Yeah.
In this game, it's an evil corporation that has blacked out the world, and you are an agent being sent there. You don't talk to the agency for like the first few hours of the game, and then eventually you reestablish contact, and then he's there going, skills for killing, all the same shit. But like trying to be self-aware about it in a way that doesn't work.
Oof.
but the villainy is never addressed.
The villainy, no. Instead, it's like, here's this director of the agency, this bad man from Crackdown 1, teaming up with rebel leader lady who is like very much like woke, like, the people. We've got to take down these corporations. And then the voice of the agent is like, we've got to take down these corporations. And you're like, what the fuck?
Like you are yourself a corrupt, evil institution. Like what?
Right. So instead, it's
which
this,
is never like
it's this weird attempt. Like at some point, is it like, no, man, the cops are on your side? Like, what is the message this game is trying to send?
like the agency should have been the bad guys in this game. Like that should have been the logical follow up from Crackdown 1.
Yes, and I thought that's where it was heading because you team up with a rebel lady, and I was like, oh, the agency's going to come back in, but they're going to somehow be behind. And like, no, it's never addressed. Yeah. The events of Crackdown 1 are never addressed. And, granted, that was a billion years ago. So, if for a game that they were at one point going to just call Crackdown, maybe they felt they didn't need to, like no one cared about the lore of Crackdown. And they just said, fuck it, we checked every box. But he says skills for kills, what more do you want from me?
But 99% of our interest in this game is out of reverence for Crackdown 1, like people who are coming to this game are doing it because they love the first game.
And this doesn't feel like it, this does not feel like it honors the memory of Crackdown 1, I guess, I would say. Or if it does, then it makes me feel like the people that made this game really didn't like Crackdown 1 or felt that it was like the most bland and generic thing on the world. And they're like, nailed it. Like, I don't know. It's weird. It's weird. I feel like Crackdown deserved better.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that they make another Crackdown, like with how long this game's development took.
Seriously.
And what came out on the other end of it. Like, I just can't imagine that they stick with this. This feels like something that they were like, well, we killed everything else, so one of these games has to
one of those 2014 games has to make it to release.
I guess we got it. I mean,
Scalebound didn't, Phantom Dust didn't.
Right.
Something that we announced from that E3 has to.
How bad must those games have been if this was the one that made it through?
Yeah.
Well, maybe, I don't know, Scalebound, jury's still out, I guess.
Yeah. We'll see.